Princess Elena had always been different from other royals. While her sisters spent their days in silk gowns discussing marriage proposals, Elena preferred riding horses through the palace grounds and practicing sword fighting with the royal guards. Her father, King Marcus, often worried about her unusual behavior, but her mother, Queen Isabella, secretly admired her daughter's fierce spirit. The trouble started on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Elena had just finished her morning training session with Captain Rodriguez, the head of the Royal Guard. She was walking back to the palace, her clothes dusty and her hair messy from the intense workout, when she overheard a conversation that would change everything. Two guards were talking quietly near the stable entrance. "The rebels are planning something big," whispered Guard Thomas to his companion. "I heard they want to attack during the harvest festival next week. They think the royal family will be distracted." Elena froze behind a large oak tree, her heart pounding. The harvest festival was the kingdom's most important celebration, when thousands of people from neighboring villages would come to the palace grounds. Her entire family would be exposed and vulnerable. She knew she had to act. But when she approached Captain Rodriguez with this information, his reaction was not what she expected. The weathered old soldier who had served the royal family for 30 years looked at her with concern and fear in his eyes. "Princess, you must promise me something," he said, gripping her shoulders firmly. "Stay away from this matter. Lock yourself in your chambers during the festival and don't come out until we give you the all clear." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious? My family is in danger and you want me to hide like a scared child?" Captain Rodriguez's voice became more urgent. "You don't understand the gravity of this situation. These rebels are not ordinary criminals. They are trained assassins who have been planning this attack for months. They know every detail about the royal family's schedule and security measures." The Thai princess felt her blood boil with anger. She had spent years training alongside these guards, learning their techniques and earning their respect through hard work and dedication. Now, when her skills were needed most, they wanted her to run and hide. "I've trained just as hard as any of your men," she said, her voice rising. "I can fight, I can strategize, and I know this palace better than anyone. How can you ask me to abandon my family when they need protection?" But Captain Rodriguez was unwavering. He had seen too many battles and lost too many good soldiers to take any chances with the princess's safety. "Your Highness, my duty is to protect the royal family, and that includes protecting you from yourself. This is not a game or a training exercise. Real people will die, and I cannot live with the thought that you might be one of them." Elena realized that convincing the captain would be impossible. His mind was made up, and he would probably post extra guards outside her chambers to make sure she stayed put during the festival. But she had never been the type of person to give up easily, especially when her family's lives were at stake. That evening, she sat in her room, staring out the window at the festival preparations below. Workers were setting up colorful tents and decorations throughout the palace grounds. In just 5 days, this peaceful scene would turn into a potential battlefield, and she was expected to watch it all happen from her window, like a helpless spectator. As she watched the servants busily preparing for the celebration, an idea began to form in her mind. If Captain Rodriguez wouldn't let her help as Princess Elena, then maybe she would have to find another way to protect her family. The rebels might know everything about the royal family's security measures, but they probably didn't know about the secret passages and hidden rooms that Elena had discovered during her childhood adventures in the palace. She spent the rest of the night planning her next move, knowing that whatever she decided to do would have consequences that would change her life forever. The next morning, Elena woke up with a clear plan in mind. She would gather more information about the rebel plot while pretending to follow Captain Rodriguez's orders. If she could discover exactly when and how the attack would happen, she might be able to prevent it without putting herself in direct danger. She started by visiting the palace kitchen, where the servants always knew the latest gossip. The head cook, Maria, had worked at the palace for over 20 years and had a network of contacts throughout the kingdom. "Maria, have you heard any strange rumors lately?" Elena asked casually, while helping herself to fresh bread and honey. The older woman looked around nervously before leaning closer. Well, Your Highness, there have been some odd things happening in the village. Several strangers have been asking questions about the palace schedule and the festival arrangements. My cousin who works at the market said they seemed very interested in knowing which entrances would be used by the royal family. Elena's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. What did these strangers look like? They dressed like merchants, but my cousin said their hands were too soft for people who work with goods all day, and they carried themselves like soldiers, with straight backs and alert eyes that missed nothing. This confirmed Elena's worst fears. The rebels were already in position, studying the palace and gathering intelligence. She thanked Maria and headed to the library, where she hoped to find old maps of the palace that might show security weak points the guards had forgotten about. As she searched through dusty books and ancient scrolls, she discovered something troubling. The palace had several underground tunnels that connected to the surrounding forest. These passages had been built centuries ago as escape routes during times of war, but they had been sealed off decades ago and were no longer monitored by the guards. Elena realized that if the rebels knew about these tunnels, they could enter the palace grounds without being detected by the main security. She needed to investigate these passages immediately, but she also knew that Captain Rodriguez would never allow it. That afternoon, she approached the captain again, hoping to convince him to at least check the old tunnels. But his response was even more firm than before. "Princess Elena, I've already assigned extra guards to patrol your chambers," he said sternly. "You will not be allowed to leave your room starting tomorrow evening until the festival is over. I've also instructed the kitchen staff not to provide you with any information about security matters." Elena felt trapped and frustrated. The captain was treating her like a prisoner in her own home. "Captain Rodriguez, you're making a mistake. I found information about old tunnels that could be compromised. At least send some guards to investigate them." "We have already secured all known entrances to the palace," he replied. "My men have been preparing for this threat for days. We know what we're doing, and we don't need a princess getting in the way of our operations." His words stung deeply. Elena had always respected Captain Rodriguez and considered him almost like a second father. To hear him dismiss her concerns and abilities so completely was heartbreaking, but it also made her more determined than ever to prove that she could help protect her family. That night, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She would sneak out of the palace and investigate the old tunnels herself. If she found evidence that they were being used by the rebels, she would have proof that the guards had overlooked something important. She waited until midnight, when the palace was quiet, and most of the guards were focused on the outer perimeters. Using skills she had learned during years of sneaking around the palace as a child, she slipped out of her room through a hidden panel behind her wardrobe. The secret passage led to a small door in the palace gardens. Elena had discovered this fruit when she was 12 years old and had used it many times to escape boring royal functions. Now it would help her save her family's lives. As she made her way through the dark gardens toward the forest, she carried a small lantern and a dagger that she had hidden in her room. The night was cold and foggy, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Every sound made her heart jump, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. When she reached the area where the old tunnel entrances should be located, she was shocked by what she found. The heavy stone slabs that had sealed the passages for decades had been moved aside. Fresh footprints in the soft earth led from the forest directly into the tunnels. Elena's worst fears were confirmed. The rebels had found a way into the palace that the guards knew nothing about. She had to get back and warn Captain Rodriguez immediately, even if it meant admitting that she had disobeyed his direct orders. Elena rushed back to the palace, her mind racing with the implications of what she had discovered. The rebels had been planning this attack for much longer than anyone realized, and they had found a weakness in the palace's defenses that could prove deadly for her family. But as she approached the secret garden entrance, she heard voices coming from inside the tunnel behind her. Her blood ran cold as she realized that rebels were moving through the passages right now, probably conducting a final reconnaissance before the festival attack. She pressed herself against a large tree and listened carefully. 3 men were speaking in low voices as they emerged from the tunnel entrance. "The route is perfect," one of them whispered. "We can move 20 men through here without being detected." They'll never expect an attack from inside the palace walls. What? About the princess? Asked another voice. I heard she's been asking questions around the village. Some people think she might know something. Helena's heart nearly stopped beating. They knew she had been investigating them. Don't worry about her, replied the first man, who seemed to be their leader. Captain Rodriguez has already locked her away in her chambers. She won't be a problem during the operation. Good. The plan is simple then. Tomorrow night, during the fireworks display, we enter through the tunnels and position ourselves around the main courtyard. When the royal family comes out to address the crowd, we strike fast and escape the same way we came in. Elena had heard. Enough. She needed to get this information to Captain Rodriguez immediately, even though she knew he would be furious about her disobedience. As quietly as possible, she began making her way back to the palace, but her luck ran out when she stepped on a dry branch, creating a loud crack that echoed through the silent forest. The rebels heard it immediately and began searching for the source of the noise. Someone's out there, hissed one of the men. Check the area. Elena ran as fast as she could through the dark gardens, using every shortcut and hiding place she knew. Behind her, she could hear the rebels crashing through the bushes, getting closer with each passing second. She reached the secret entrance to the palace and slipped inside, but she wasn't sure if they had seen her or not. Her hands were shaking as she made her way through the hidden passages back to her room. Once inside, she sat on her bed and tried to calm down enough to think clearly. She now knew exactly when and how the attack would happen, but convincing Captain Rodriguez to listen to her would be nearly impossible. The next morning, Elena was surprised to find 2 guards stationed outside her door when she tried to leave her room. Captain Rodriguez had made good on his promise to keep her locked away until the festival was over. I need to speak with Captain Rodriguez immediately, she told the guards. It's extremely important. I'm sorry, Your Highness, replied the older guard. The captain's orders were very clear. You are not to leave this room, and he is not to be disturbed with requests from you. Elena realized that her situation had become desperate. The festival would begin in just a few hours, and her family would be walking into a trap. She had to find another way to get the information to someone who could help. She went to her window and looked down at the courtyard below, where servants were making final preparations for the evening's celebration. Then she had an idea that seemed crazy, but might be her only option. Elena grabbed a piece of paper and wrote a detailed message explaining everything she had learned about the rebel plot. She included information about the tunnels, the timing of the attack, and the exact number of rebels involved. Then she wrapped the message around a small stone and waited for the right moment. When she saw Captain Rodriguez walking across the courtyard below, she opened her window and threw the weighted message as hard as she could, aiming for a spot right in front of his feet. The stone landed exactly where she intended, and Captain Rodriguez stopped to pick it up. Elena watched from her window as he unfolded the paper and read her message. She could see his face growing more serious with each line. After reading the message, the captain looked up at Elena's window. Their eyes met, and she could see that he was torn between anger at her disobedience and concern about the information she had provided. A few minutes later, Elena heard footsteps in the corridor outside her room. Captain Rodriguez entered, accompanied by 2 of his most trusted guards. His expression was a mixture of frustration and worry. Princess Elena, he said in a stern voice, you have put yourself in serious danger by ignoring my direct orders. But if what you've written in this message is true, then you may have just saved your family's lives. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, someone was taking her seriously. Captain, everything in that message is true. I saw the rebels coming out of the tunnel with my own eyes, and I heard them discussing their attack plan. Captain. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. If you're right about these tunnels, then our entire security plan is compromised. We need to act quickly to seal those entrances and capture any rebels who might already be inside the palace grounds. Captain Rodriguez made a quick decision that surprised everyone, including Elena herself. Instead of sending her back to her room under heavy guard, he decided to use her knowledge of the secret passages to help capture the rebels. Princess, you know these tunnels better than any of my men, he said after a moment of deep thought. If we're going to stop this attack, We need someone who can guide us through those passages without getting lost or making noise that would alert the rebels. Elena couldn't believe what she was hearing. After days of trying to convince the captain to let her help, he was finally asking for her assistance. "I know every tunnel and hidden room in this palace," she said eagerly. "I can get your men to exactly where they need to be." But Captain Rodriguez held up his hand to stop her excitement. "This is not a game, Princess. If you come with us, you'll be putting yourself in real danger. These rebels are trained killers, and they won't hesitate to harm you if they discover our plan." "I understand the risks," Elena replied firmly, "but my family's lives are at stake. I won't sit safely in my room while you and your men risk everything to protect them." The captain looked at her for a long moment, seeing the determination in her eyes. He had trained her himself and knew she was skilled with weapons and strategy. More importantly, he realized that without her help, his men might not be able to navigate the complex tunnel system quickly enough to prevent the attack. "Very well," he said finally. "But you will follow my orders exactly, and at the first sign of serious danger you will retreat to safety." "Agreed?" Elena nodded eagerly, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. She was finally going to be part of protecting her family instead of being protected from the danger. Captain Rodriguez quickly assembled a team of his most experienced guards. He explained the situation and outlined their plan. They would split into 3 groups. One would seal the tunnel entrances from the outside. Another would position themselves in the main courtyard to protect the royal family during the festival. And the third group would enter the tunnels with Elena to capture any rebels already inside the palace grounds. As they prepared for the operation, Elena changed into dark clothing and armed herself with a sword and dagger. She had trained with these weapons for years, but tonight would be the first time she used them in a real fight. The sun was setting as they made their way to the forest entrance of the tunnel system. Elena led Captain Rodriguez and 5 guards through the hidden passages she had discovered as a child. The tunnels were dark and damp, with water dripping from the stone walls and the sound of their footsteps echoing eerily in the narrow spaces. They moved deeper into the passage system. Elena used hand signals to communicate with the guards, just as she had learned during her training sessions. She guided them past several branching tunnels, choosing the routes that would bring them closest to the main palace without alerting any rebels who might be hiding in the underground maze. After 20 minutes of careful movement, they heard voices ahead. Elena held up her hand to signal the guards to stop, and they all pressed themselves against the tunnel walls to listen. "The fireworks will start in 1 hour," whispered a rebel voice. "That's when we move into position. Remember, we need to be completely silent until the signal is given." Captain Rodriguez counted at least 4 different voices, which meant there were more rebels in the tunnels than Elena had originally seen. He made quick hand signals to his men, dividing them into 2 groups that would approach the rebels from different directions. Elena was assigned to stay with Captain Rodriguez and 2 guards who would circle around behind the rebels. As they moved through a side tunnel that Elena knew would bring them out behind their targets, her heart was beating so loudly, she was afraid the rebels might hear it. When they reached the position Captain Rodriguez had indicated, Elena could see the rebels clearly for the first time. There were 6 men, all dressed in dark clothes and carrying weapons. They were studying a map of the palace grounds and discussing which routes they would take to reach the main courtyard. Captain Rodriguez waited until his other group was in position, then gave a signal that would begin the attack. Elena watched in fascination as the guards moved with perfect coordination, surrounding the rebels before they even realized they were in danger. "Drop your weapons and surrender," shouted Captain Rodriguez as his men emerged from the shadows, with swords drawn. The rebels were caught completely off guard, but they were experienced fighters who recovered quickly from their surprise. Instead of surrendering, they drew their own weapons and prepared to fight their way out of the trap. What happened next would test everything Elena had learned during her years of training with the royal guards. The tunnel erupted into chaos as the rebels fought desperately to escape the trap. Steel clashed against steel in the narrow underground space, creating sparks that illuminated the fierce battle. Elena pressed herself against the tunnel wall, watching as Captain Rodriguez and his men engaged the rebels in close combat. One of the rebels, a tall man with a scarred face, managed to break away from the main fight and started running toward Elena's position. She realized he was trying to reach a side tunnel that would allow him to escape and continue with the assassination plot. Without thinking, Elena drew her sword and stepped into the rebel's path. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The scarred man laughed when he saw her. "A little princess thinks she can stop me? Step aside, girl, before you get hurt." But Elena had spent years training for moments like this. When the rebel lunged at her with his blade, she was ready. She parried his attack and countered with a quick thrust that forced him to step backward. The man's confident smile disappeared as he realized that the princess was a skilled fighter. "You trained her well, Rodriguez," the rebel shouted over the sound of the ongoing battle. "But it won't be enough to save your royal family tonight." Elena and the scarred rebel circled each other in the narrow tunnel, each looking for an opening to strike. She could hear Captain Rodriguez fighting behind her, but she couldn't look away from her opponent for even a second. The rebel was stronger and more experienced than Elena, but she had advantages he didn't expect. She knew every stone and crack in these tunnels, and she was fighting to protect people she loved. When he made a powerful overhead strike, she dodged to the side and used his momentum against him, causing him to stumble forward into the tunnel wall. Before he could recover, Elena pressed her sword to his throat. "Surrender now, or I'll make sure you never threaten my family again." The rebel dropped his weapon, realizing he had been defeated by someone he had underestimated completely. Elena quickly used rope from her pack to tie his hands behind his back, just as Captain Rodriguez had taught her during training exercises. When she turned around, she saw that the guards had successfully captured all 6 rebels. Captain Rodriguez looked at her with amazement and pride. "Princess Elena, that was exceptional sword work. You handled yourself like a true warrior." But their victory celebration was cut short when they heard the sound of explosions coming from above. The fireworks display had begun, which meant the main part of the rebel attack was about to start. Elena realized there might be more rebels who had already reached the palace through other tunnels. "Captain, we need to get to the main courtyard immediately," she said urgently. "If there are more rebels in the palace, my family is still in danger." Captain Rodriguez nodded and quickly assigned 2 guards to escort the captured rebels to the palace dungeon. Then he, Elena, and the remaining guards hurried through the tunnels toward the main palace. As they emerged from the underground passages, they could hear the sounds of the festival in full swing. Thousands of people had gathered in the main courtyard to watch the fireworks and hear the royal family's traditional harvest speech. But Elena knew that somewhere in that crowd, more rebels might be waiting to strike. They reached the courtyard just as King Marcus and Queen Isabella stepped onto the main balcony to address the crowd. Elena's heart stopped when she saw movement in the shadows near the base of the balcony. 3 figures dressed as servants were positioning themselves directly below her parents, and she could see the glint of weapons hidden beneath their festival costumes. "There!" she shouted to Captain Rodriguez, pointing toward the suspicious figures. "Those aren't real servants." The captain immediately saw what Elena had spotted. The 3 rebels were in perfect position to attack the royal family when they came down from the balcony after their speech. He signaled to his men, who began moving through the crowd to surround the hidden assassins. But as they approached, one of the rebels noticed the guards closing in on their position. He shouted a warning to his companions, and all 3 drew their weapons and began fighting their way toward the balcony stairs. The festival crowd panicked when they saw the weapons, screaming and running in all directions. In the chaos, Elena lost sight of Captain Rodriguez and found herself separated from the guards. She could see her parents on the balcony, unaware of the danger approaching them from below. Elena knew she had to act quickly. The rebels would reach her parents in less than a minute, and there was no time to find Captain Rodriguez or wait for the other guards to fight their way through the panicking crowd. She drew her sword and began pushing through the crowd toward the balcony stairs, determined to reach her parents before the rebels could harm them. This would be the most important fight of her life, and everything she had learned about courage, skill, and protecting the people she loved would be put to the ultimate test. Elena fought her way through the panicking crowd, using every skill she had learned to reach the balcony stairs before the rebels. People were screaming and running in all directions, making it nearly impossible to move quickly through the chaos. But her determination to protect her family gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She reached the bottom of the stairs just as the first rebel was climbing toward the balcony where her parents stood. King Marcus and Queen Isabella were still trying to calm the crowd, unaware that deadly assassins were approaching them from below. "Stop right there," Elena shouted, positioning herself between the rebels and the stairs. The three assassins turned to face her, their faces showing surprise and anger. The leader, a woman with cold blue eyes, laughed harshly. "The little princess wants to play hero. How touching. You'll have to go through me to reach my family," Elena replied, raising her sword and taking a fighting stance. What happened next amazed everyone who witnessed it. Elena fought all three rebels simultaneously, using the narrow stairway to prevent them from surrounding her. She had never faced such skilled opponents before, but years of training with Captain Rodriguez had prepared her for this moment. The first rebel attacked with a curved blade, trying to strike her from the left side. Elena blocked his attack and spun around to parry a thrust from the second assassin. The third rebel, the woman leader, waited for an opening while her companions tried to overwhelm the princess with coordinated attacks. But Elena had grown up in this palace, and she knew every stone step and handrail on these stairs. When the second rebel overextended his attack, she used the stair railing to leverage a kick that sent him tumbling backward into his companion. The rebel leader saw her chance and lunged forward with a deadly thrust aimed at Elena's heart. But the princess had anticipated this move. She stepped aside at the last second and grabbed the woman's wrist, using her momentum to throw her down the stairs. Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez and his guards had finally fought their way through the crowd. They arrived just in time to see Elena defeat the last standing rebel with a perfect disarming technique that sent his weapon flying through the air. "Princess Elena," Captain Rodriguez called out as he reached her position. "Are you injured?" Elena looked down at herself and was surprised to see that despite facing three deadly assassins, she had only minor cuts on her arms. "I'm fine, Captain, but we need to make sure there are no more rebels in the crowd." King Marcus and Queen Isabella had witnessed the entire fight from the balcony above. They came down the stairs immediately, their faces showing a mixture of pride, fear, and amazement. "Elena, what you just did was incredibly brave," said King Marcus, embracing his daughter tightly. "But it was also incredibly dangerous. You could have been killed." Queen Isabella looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes. "We had no idea you had become such a skilled warrior. Captain Rodriguez has trained you well." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression serious but respectful. "Your Majesties, Princess Elena didn't just fight bravely tonight. She discovered the rebel plot, found their secret entrance to the palace, and guided my men to capture the main group of assassins. Without her help, this attack would have succeeded." The crowd had begun to calm down as the guards secured the area and removed the captured rebels. Many people had seen Elena's heroic fight on the stairs, and word was spreading quickly through the courtyard about what the princess had done. King Marcus looked at his daughter with new understanding and respect. "Elena, I owe you an apology. I've spent so many years worrying about your unusual interests and trying to make you behave like a traditional princess. But tonight you proved that your strength and courage are exactly what this kingdom needs." Elena felt overwhelmed by her father's words. "I just did what felt right. I couldn't stand by and watch while our family was in danger." Captain Rodriguez smiled at her with genuine pride. "Princess Elena, I also owe you an apology. I was wrong to try to keep you away from this fight. You proved tonight that you belong alongside the royal guard, protecting the people you love." The festival continued late into the night, but now it had a different meaning for everyone who attended. Instead of just celebrating the harvest, they were celebrating the courage of a princess who had refused to accept limitations on what she could accomplish. In the days that followed, Elena's actions became legendary throughout the kingdom. Songs were written about the princess who fought assassins on the palace stairs, and young girls throughout the land began asking their parents if they could learn sword fighting too. But for Elena, the most important change was in her relationship with her family and the royal guard. She was no longer seen as a problem to be managed or a person to be protected. She had earned her place as a defender of the kingdom, and no one would ever again tell her to quit when her people needed her help. Captain Rodriguez made her an official member of the Royal Guard the following week, making Elena the first princess in the kingdom's history to hold such a position. And when he offered her the choice of a comfortable office job or active duty protecting the royal family, her response didn't surprise anyone who knew her. "Captain," she said with a confident smile, "I didn't fight those rebels just so I could sit behind a desk. When do we start my next training session?"